Visionary. By Douglas Milewski. Elemental P. United States. Copyright 2016 by Douglas Milewski. All rights reserved. Chapter 3. At this point, I need to talk about wizards because most people believe tripe when it comes to wizards. When I say wizard, you think of Merlin or Woodbine McCune or John Appleseed. What unites all of these wizards is fiction. Merlin never existed, the historical Woodbine McCune had no relationship to the pulp hero of the dime store novel, and John Appleseed wasn't even a wizard. They are total fictions. All those stories, novels, and serials that they starred in provide an unrealistic view of wizardry, high excitement, clever spellcasting, and impossible spells. If I were to present to you the stories of Dr. Frankenstein or Dr. Jekyll, you would not come away from those stories thinking that scientists can actually do crazy things like build a man out of body parts or turn into a monster. Likewise, you wouldn't seriously believe that a man can build a time machine in his garden shed, nor would you believe that a gun club can shoot a man to the moon in a giant bullet. These stories are all fancies, and you know that they are fancies. In the same way, all the stories of wizardry are fancies. They are fictions on the order of rocket ships or the Cheshire Cat. Yet, for some reason that I cannot fathom, the topic of wizardry causes otherwise intelligent people to lose all judgment and believe whatever is presented to them. The implausible becomes the norm, and the impossible hangs well within reach. That's fine for children who love jumping headfirst into imagination, but adults really should know better. Understanding real wizards takes us far into the ordinary and the pedestrian. According to royal law, wizard is a regulated title, much like lawyer or vicar. Like those professions, wizards fit into the world that they lived in, making their living just the same as everyone else. No amount of magic is sufficient to summon up food or rent. Your local wizard was about as extraordinary and noteworthy as your local physician, and in many cases they were the same person. In truth, any damned fool could learn magic, given enough education and training, except me who couldn't. I've got a magical polio, so to speak. Also, in truth, most magicians are not extraordinary practitioners of magic, just as most musicians are not extraordinary players, and most artists are not extraordinary artists. You don't even need to be a wizard to do magic. Many people know how to cast a few simple spells or do parlor tricks. Some people become enthusiasts, able to do more complicated spells, and some of them exceed what many trained wizards can do. Go down to the circus, and you will see some incredible and truly dangerous acts. Those magicians practice extensively in order to breathe flame from their mouths and juggle fire. Luke Mather always pointed them out and said, "Don't look down on them, 'cause by Peter, that's some mighty fine casting going on." Some people who seemingly perform magic don't even bother to use magic at all. It's all show. Every medium and fortune teller out there is a fraud. There is no way for them to cast the spells that they claim to cast, and if they really could do those things, don't you think that historians and theologians would have them working to answer the most pressing questions of our society? Those false professions exist only because gullible people have some unmet inner need. Hucksters take advantage of those human desires, and so they separate a fool from his money. This is why you see laws against such things. In the Middle Ages, Charlemagne ruled a considerable chunk of the Old World. In those days, the common man's language no longer resembled the Latin of the ancients, so churchmen increasingly grew illiterate. In order to combat this creeping ignorance, Charlemagne invented the university. The purpose of the university was to train priests and theologians in the skills needed by the church. This training was especially important for those who would obtain high positions such as bishops and cardinals. They were taught the ancient language, but in order to learn it, students needed a variety of books to learn from that weren't scripture, so the classical pagan literature of the Romans was preserved, not for its pagan content, but to serve as an example of excellent language. In those days, scholars still believed that wizardry could predict the future and speak with the dead, and those two things had significant theological implications. Such powers could not be left outside the church, so magic became one of the primary skills of the priest. In this way, the university became the center of magic, and the profession of wizardry became associated with the church. There were still wonder workers of all sorts out there, they never disappeared, but those workers kept themselves in tight-knit societies with secrecy as the norm, acting as guilds. Knowledge and fiction commingled among such practitioners, who were more concerned with turning lead into gold or advancing among their peers than they were in advancing any sort of public good. As a graduating student could enter the seminary, so too could the student enter the tacitum, the speaking place. It was there that students learned the most advanced magical arts of their day. If successful, these students would earn the title of magus. Eventually, a lower title, incantator, was created for those who went through all their studies but failed to pass the exam for magus. Most wizards went on to government or church posts, while incantators or enchanters went to work in the lower levels of the church or went into business. As times changed, the practicalities of being a wizard changed along with the church. When King Henry VIII broke away from Catholicism, so too did the English universities. The same anti-Catholic laws that limited religious freedom applied to the universities, limiting the advancement of Catholics into that profession. The publication of Principia Alchemy by Newton changed our understanding of magic, making it so that magic no longer acted without principle. For the first time, it was accountable. Bacon suggested many ways of developing magic better. Whewell put the science of magic onto its modern foundations. The colonial education system inherited this English system, which brings us to me. Showing great promise, I entered university at the tender age of 10 with the expectation that I would become a wizard. After grueling interviews and many meetings and some extraordinary luck, I was admitted on a scholarship. They believed me a wonder child, a genius, one day capable of matching the greatness of Newton, Bacon, or Whewell. All of this was decided for me. I had no reason to question it, nor to question my own future. In that I was damned. I was given a schedule, not a future. Who gave me my future? One of my students. He wasn't an amazing student or anything. He was a scholarship boy just like me, except I was to be his tutor despite being significantly younger. His promise was not noteworthy. If he had continued, I am sure that he would have failed his exam and become some town's enchanter, making a meager but respectable living dowsing, chasing away bad spirits or something like that. His name was Samuel Thomas Greer, and he was the most sincere Christian that I ever knew. I don't mean devout, which is when you think so much of yourself that you must demonstrate to everyone around you that you are more Christian than they, or maybe that you feel it more than everyone does. No. I mean that he was sincere. He knew what Jesus said to do, and he had very realistic expectations about what that meant, yet he still tried to live that way anyway. I had never met a Christian quite like him. I had been brought up in a reasonably strict Catholic household, where the rules of faith were summarized and memorized. As long as you followed the rules, your salvation was assured. To put this in a more certain perspective, heaven was achieved by avoidance of sin. Avoid sin enough and you reached heaven. Of course it was more complicated than that, as all things are, but my boyish mind still clung to those simplistic notions that my family had handed to me. They were not scholarly people. Steadfast devotion meant more than contemplation. In all my studies, I had not had time to mature my thinking about faith. It had never occurred to me that I should. Yet those afternoons with Mel shook my faith to its foundations. He was secretly a member of the New Church, which was an offshoot of Christianity that I had never heard of. They believed lots of things that I had never heard of before. Mostly, that religion was not so rigid as the one I had been brought up to know. Secretly being a different religion from Anglicanism was the norm, if not expected. Such heterodoxy was commonplace. As long as you kept up appearances, the administration ignored you. I think that the administration was more offended by having to act than by learning the truth. Given the vast variance in the religious norm, everyone worked hard to keep any improprieties isolated and quiet. I doubt that half of us were truly Anglicans, with many of us being Jews or atheists. When Mel and I would sit, he would attack the Catholic Church and I would defend it, while I would attack the New Church and he would defend that. We argued well. In fact, we both argued so well that we swapped places, and that's where our worlds crashed. Eventually, Mel abandoned his plans for the Tacitum. After significant soul-searching, he decided that the structure that he sought was not to be found in the rules of magic, but in the rules of theologians. To my own horror, he embraced the very view that I now found myself doubting, and I found myself enthralled with the view that he had previously offered. He didn't quite become Catholic, though. Anglicanism suited him sufficiently. From that day onward, the meaning slowly drifted out of my work. All around me, I only saw the stiff and lifeless institutions which existed to continue their own existence, and perpetuated themselves by perpetuating themselves. The institutions were nothing but chants muttered over and over until the chanter grew insane, unable to utter anything but the chants that he muttered. My faith had stood like a tree, its roots slowly dying beneath it. Mel had not killed it, he had only toppled it over. If not for Mel, I don't think that I could have left the university. I would have stayed there, plodding onward, because it was the only world that I knew. Yet I remembered Mel's courage. When I left, I risked far less. All I did was change my name and join the army. Ever since then, I've lived out of a duffel bag or a suitcase or whatever else could hold my clothes. I never returned to Ivy Hall. I never even tried university life again. That brings me to the present. Needing some spiritual guidance, I picked up the phone and called the rectory. Mel, this is your old school chum. Remember me? How could I forget? We always talked that way. I never knew if someone from the church was listening. You were never right to assume you were safe. Do you have time to talk? Is this good? I need some priestly advice. I can offer. Step into my confessional. He was really saying that everything was clear, and that he knew of no one who would be listening. Mel, I met a girl today. She recognized me. Time to run? I don't want to run. That's the problem. Oh ho, the heart of rubber is growing soft. I don't need a hard time, Mel. No, you don't. I'm sorry. Old habits. What do you need? Should I see her again? I'll see her next week. What's she look like? Beautiful. My son, perhaps you should come to confession. That was another way of warning me. Someone had entered the room and he did not feel safe talking. He never called me my son in private. Tomorrow. I went to confession sporadically. I no longer adhered to the sacrament, and I honestly didn't think that Mel did either, but those few minutes of honesty between us made our lives more bearable. Mel could have exposed me, of course, and he certainly would have won laurels for his actions, but I don't think such things were in his heart. Honest priests are like honest lawyers. They don't make a lot of money, but they never lack for clients. Never quite trusting honesty either, I had always met Mel in the confessional. That was the only speaking place in this world where he could not be forced to divulge what was spoken. By only speaking to him in the confessional, my identity was safe. At least it was safe until he found some way around it. Don't get me wrong. I trusted Mel, but I also admitted that we did not live without temptations or conflicts. The church has its own nasty politics, and men desperate to stay out of its merciless dogfights will resort to sacrificing someone. I'd be a fool if I didn't admit that I could very well be one of those people sacrificed. We have this wonderful pillar of our government called the church, which unites all of the Christians of this nation into one so-called church, which as far as I can discern is the biggest boondoggle ever perpetrated upon religion by any faith ever recorded. Business was the hammer on the flag and religion was the cross, although many people thought that those symbols were backward. Business seemed there to crucify us and the church seemed there to hammer us, which shows you just how much of a boondoggle the state church became. The state church itself was an amalgam of the respectable churches, with every disfavored cult and congregation thrown to the wolves, especially the Catholics. If you didn't want to get thrown, then you became a wolf yourself. Many people switched congregations, but many did not. We Catholics are nothing if not impractical and stubborn. The next day, before heading off to work, I walked over to St. Peter's to visit Mel. I said, "Father, forgive me for I have sinned." Mel knew my voice. Despite what we would like to believe, not all women are virtuous. She says she'll keep my secret. Really? That's rare. And she's good with that? I had to gush a little. Yes. She's smart too. Smarter than most people would give her credit for. She's smarter than most of my students used to be, but that isn't hard. Any advice? Invest your money in gold. Otherwise, stay cautious and keep your bags packed. You never know when someone will change sides. That was always a danger that I feared. I will if I can. I don't want to. For once in a long time, I don't feel like I'm living a lie. Mel chuckled. You were never a Rolling Stone, John, and I'm surprised that you've kept up wandering this long. So am I. I was like a musician drifting from band to band, where home was the illusion and the road was home. If anything, I was a ritualist at heart, needing the same hymns every Sunday, having so long ago memorized when people stand and kneel that I had no longer recalled changing position. I heard someone enter the confessional on the other side. That was too quick, damn it. I didn't even get 2 minutes. My son, go forth and sin no more. That I should be so fortunate. Misfortune was with me that day. When I walked out of the confessional, I saw 2 familiar faces at the pews. Fancy Charlie knelt, rosary in hand, while Joe leaned back and inspected the stonework. At least he took off his hat. Joe stood up and walked over to me while Charlie took the time to cross himself, exit the pew, then genuflect. Joe put his arm around me and guided me back outside. Why are you guys here? Time to get you a suit. Get in. Charlie knows a wop who's a wonder. Why? I wanted to know why before I went along, because I already knew that I would be going along. Joe was not one to take no for an answer. Baroness Paget heard that Cymbeline met somebody nice, so she invited you to her party on Saturday. She wants to talk to you, and she always makes sure that her guests look presentable. We'll pick you up around 5 and we'll take you home again after the party. The Baroness doesn't much approve of immaterialness in her house, so keep your nose up. By that I think that he meant immorality, but you never knew with Joe. What kind of party is this? I could almost imagine such parties, and I did not like what I imagined. The words dull and grinding came to mind. Fancy. Everybody gets fancy. As I thought, dull. This struck me as a good time for asking, who exactly is Baroness Paget? I'm not sure that I know her. She's Baroness Hildegard Paget, widow of Baron Paget. He was on the short list for governor before independence, then on the wrong short list after the revolution. She's still got a nice house outside of town and likes to take in strays. Play your cards right and she'll help you along. That's why you need a suit. She's a stickler for propriety. Fancy Charlie nodded his agreement. And Charlie here? Charlie smiled. Joe spoke for him. After the war, Charlie here was a Trappist. When they closed his monastery, he kept on being a monk anyway, sorta. Those government types can take the monk out of the cloister, but they can't take the cloister out of the monk. He's not a perfect monk, but he's got the quiet part down pat. Charlie nodded. Joe put his arm around Charlie's shoulders. He can talk, mind you, but there are rules about that. Charlie here needs to speak as little as possible, which suits him fine. He got out of the army and went straight into orders. A lot of guys did that. You'd be surprised. Charlie shrugged and shook his head. He may have had more of a story, but he wasn't willing to break his silence over it. Given the horrors of the Great War, I avoided asking. The tailor lived in Little Italy, working out of his basement. Nobody would guess that the battered door led to a tailor. I've been in few speakeasies harder to find. Inside we met a tough bastard in a white undershirt who reeked of cigarette smoke and rancid fish oil. His hair flopped about his head as he looked me over, figuring how to best murder me. How soon? The tailor demanded. How did a tailor get such muscles? Tomorrow. Too damn fast. Only for her, but she'll pay. I do what I'm told. The tailor nodded again. I looked about his place. All sorts of vestments occupied all sorts of piles. The man was a rebel Catholic vestment maker. I hadn't even suspected that such a thing existed. I asked, "Don't you need my measurements?" The fellow looked at me like I had a knife in my hand. I'm thankful that no scissors were within his reach. Where'd you get this bird? Cymbeline likes him, so the boss wants to meet him. She has a party tomorrow. She's too good for him. I was getting frustrated with all of this and tried stuffing my foot deeper into my mouth. Couldn't I just rent a tux? The tailor took immediate offense. I feared for my life. Porco Dio, he shouted at me. He lunged for a large pair of scissors. Charlie bumped his arm and Joe scooted next to me. Apologize, whispered Joe in my ear. I saw the violence in the tailor's eyes, so I lowered my head. I'm sorry. I didn't know. They hadn't told me about you. The man stopped in shock, distress slowly escaping his face. Not told you? Joe Figlio di Patana, I thought that we were friends. I welcomed you into my house and you played with my children like an uncle, and now you say something like that. You've broken my heart. Joe held his head low. I'm sorry. This was all of a sudden. It's all my fault. Jack, this is my friend, the best tailor in town. If anyone can make you look good, he will. Charlie nodded in agreement. The tailor relaxed, but his physical power remained. I accept your apology. Now you better take your friend before he says any more stupid things. Pay cash or no suit. And come around soon. My Maria, she asks after her favorite uncles. Nobody makes my little girl unhappy. When are you coming? Monday, Joe said as he pushed me out the door. Leaving that place felt like leaving the army. At least I was free now. I could go get something to eat before heading to work. Joe stomped on that small hope quickly. Hey Bird, let's go listen to some music. That was Joe's way of saying that you were coming along. Joe drove us to the Negro part of town. Joe still used nigger instead of the more acceptable Negro or the increasingly popular word colored, seeing nothing wrong with the term. That's what they are, he said. They never had a problem with it before. He fell on the oblivious side of race relations. The speakeasy place that we found was an empty garage called the Tire Factory, featuring a single trumpeter playing for tips. Both the joint and the hat were empty. I tossed in a couple nickels. Joe said, they serve up pretty good stuff, all quality. I generally dislike distilled spirits, doing my best to get none, but Joe insisted, ordering me up a Bloody Mary, as if Mary were a martyr or as if she were like Lady Macbeth, hands covered in blood. Charlie fed pennies to the slot machine in the corner. What else could you do with pennies? I think that he liked watching the dials spin around. This place is jumping at night. They put a little band over there, and everyone dances. I love the stuff. I can't understand half their jungle music, all those crazy chord changes, but who cares? Right? I can dance as good as them, and my money is as green as anybody else's. I could see the bartender's reaction to Joe's talk. The man did his best to hide his amusement at Joe, as if he were some poster child for the absurdity of the white man. I thoroughly agreed. Joe had an absurdness that ran across his practicality. In a way, his practicality was an absurdness, but at least it was an honest absurdness. He was the least racist person that I ever met, despite his language, if that makes any sense to anybody. The place had a little menu. I ordered rice and beans while Joe ordered drinks. There's usually a card game here. I don't know where folks are. Slim, where's the game? The bartender answered, Morton shot up Mr. Sox this morning down near Brown's Pharmacy. That's what I get for working late. Damn, I wish I had seen that. That lying cheater Sox Parker was living for an early grave. He was always trying to fix games. If it wasn't for the Baroness, I would have plugged him myself. I had no doubt that Joe spoke the truth. The rice and beans came out pretty good. They added little sausages and just enough red pepper to make it fun. While I ate, Joe talked to me. I learned a great deal about how slot machines rip you off, how you rig them, and how to tell that they are rigged. He then went on to tell me how to rig a card game, and how to tell if a game was rigged. I don't remember a damn bit of that, except that your own ego would stab you in the back worse than any cheater. If you can't stand losing, don't gamble. After I was done eating, I took the opportunity to say, I'd like to go to work. This time Joe shrugged, seemingly done with being at the speakeasy. Let's get you there. I have to find a new game anyway. I was thrilled when Joe dropped me off, glad to be done with him. I now had some vague hope of returning to a normal life for a few hours. With no hesitation, I threw myself into my paperwork, making sure to add everything up twice, and generally unstraightening everything that I could.